My name is Kenneth Vandenberg. I am president of Freedom Area Historical Society, and I'm here with Joanne Bowers, who is treasurer of Freedom Area Historical Society. Today is Friday the 13th, 2018, and we are interviewing Mike Randerson and Phyllis Randerson, both from Freedom. So, Mike, what is your full name?
Michael J. Randerson.
Were you named after anybody?
No, not that I know of.
Sorry.
That's an old Irish name, but I don't think, I'm
talk.
named after any Irishman I know. So,
Okay. And Phyllis, your maiden name is Garvey,
Yes, it is.
and what is your full name?
Phyllis Jean Garvey Randerson.
And were you named after anybody, Phyllis?
No, I was not. Not that I'm aware of.
And so did either one of you have nicknames growing up?
No,
No,
I didn't.
no, I didn't.
So, Mike, with you growing up right in Freedom, how did you, not have a nickname?
I guess that's funny, isn't it? But I don't. People have called me Randy because of Randerson,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody from Freedom ever called me that. I had a real good friend that always called me Randy, and once in a while in my businesses people would call me Randy, but no Freedom nickname.
And Joanne was Josie, and Dad still calls her Josie.
Yeah.
Josie's bringing me communion today. And we should mention that Joanne's maiden name was Randerson, and Mike and Joanne are cousins.
Yeah, we're first cousins. Our fathers were brothers.
So Phyllis, when is your birthday?
Do I have to give the year too?
You don't have to give the year.
February 14th, 43.
You're a Valentine baby?
Yes, I am.
I am too.
Oh.
On February 14th also.
How about that?
And Mike, when is your birthday?
April 1st. I was born April 1st, 1942.
And that was pretty appropriate for you, wasn't it?
Yes,
Mike?
it was. People say that, Ken.
Yeah. So, my dad still talks about you. He remembers you when he was working with Rusty Murphy on cars, and he's like, Mike would be 10, 11, 12 years old, and every time we were working, Mike was right there with us, under those cars, wanting to know what was what and how everything worked.
Yeah.
That's his biggest remembrance of
Yeah.
you. So Phyllis, what were your parents' name?
My parents was Mike and Florence Wallace, and of course Mike Garvey.
Okay. And Mike, your parents?
My dad was Eugene Randerson. He was a son of George Randerson. And my mother was Ora, O-R-A, Fox. And she came from Michigan.
So she wasn't related to all the Foxes in Freedom?
No relation whatsoever.
Okay. And Joanne, what are your remembrances of Mike as a kid?
Trouble. No, I was kidding. No. We were really close. I mean, we grew up almost brother and sister because
Yes,
my
we
dad
did.
passed away young. So yeah, I mean, we spent tons of time together. Grew up together, right, Mike?
We did. My dad, Kenny, I have a hard time talking about him to this very day. I mean, he was my hero. And Joanne's too. I mean, he was the most generous man you'd ever hope to meet. And Joanne's father's name was Patrick, and he died in 1943, I believe it was, Joanne, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my dad, kind of took Margie and the two kids as much as he could under his wing and helped them all that he could. I know that when we lived on the farm, they would come there and raise a garden together with my mother, Margie Wood. And we even had a bean patch that us kids would pick beans and sell the beans to raise money for our school clothes back in the day.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
And you and Joanne were in the same class or a year apart?
No, we're together.
Yeah.
Same class, okay. So you mentioned memories of your father and how he was your hero. What are your memories of your mother, Mike?
Oh, she was my hero too, really. My mom, I guess my mother became more predominantly my memories of her after my father passed away. My dad and I were the best buds, you know what I mean? He took me everywhere he went. And he knew I had a mechanical intuition, and he fostered that. He, you know, that anything he could do to give me something to work on or whatever, he did that kind of thing for me. And my childhood was actually, it was after my father died, my life changed quite drastically. We had lived on a farm when my father was alive, and we farmed on halves with my great uncle Christopher Pendergast. The farm was on Highway S, not far from Skunk Hill. And my dad also was partners in a construction company that they started in, I think, 1951 or 52, called MRK Construction Company. Marvin Murphy, Elmer Conkle, and my father owned this MRK Construction Company.
Mm-hmm.
And he was killed in August of '54. And so we had lived on the farm, and I hung out at the stone quarry, and in those days kids did stuff they'd never dream of doing these days. I mean, riding on bulldozers and trucks and all that kind of thing. It was right up my alley at that point. But then we, after my father died, we moved up to the Village of Freedom. So it was a real change from the farm life I had prior to that. And I had a really, most people don't know, but a real tough adjustment to that. But I made it through. But my mom helped me a lot there.
So your mom was your anchor then at that point?
Yes, she was, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, I always talk about my mom and Joanne's mom. They were brave women. I don't know if they make them like that anymore or not, Kenny.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to be left with kids to raise and really no skill set, so to speak, to, you know, earn money and whatever. My mom worked at various different things when we got up to Freedom to supplement the income. And I know Margie did the same thing, you know. They just did what they had to do to feed and clothe us and what have you. So.
Well, there's not a kid in Freedom around my age or younger who doesn't remember Joanne's mom from the school.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. She
Yeah.
did the finances, and you can go back in the yearbooks for years and years and years, and there's a picture of Joanne's mom in them.
Yeah, she was the first office employee that they had.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yep, and I still remember when I was a kid and she moved into that little apartment by Seelofts, and everybody was like, she's moving. That was big news in Freedom when she
Yeah.
moved.
Oh,
Because we
yeah.
lived there my entire life above the barber shop.
Yep,
Yeah.
so I remember that. So Phyllis, what do you remember most about your dad?
Well, I grew up on a dairy farm, and he was a good farmer. He probably worked too hard at a lot of times, didn't enjoy things like he should have. But I was thinking today, I remember some of the best times as a kid, picking up stones, of all things, but we were all together. When I was 12, already 13, I ran all the farm equipment. My brother and I farmed alone practically. My dad would go out and work on construction in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
And as Mike said too, kids being around equipment and doing things years ago is not like today. I look at our grandchildren and they wouldn't have a clue. You know? I mean, they can't believe the things that we tell them that we did.
Yeah.
But it was a good life. My mother worked unbelievably hard, had 9 children, And they talk about recycling today. Well, my mother recycled everything long before the term was popular.
Well, and they talk about how hard farmers worked, and they did, but I think the farmers' wives worked even harder.
Oh, yeah, I think you're
Because
right.
they were, they were out there in the fields and in the barns, and then they were doing laundry, canning, and raising the kids too.
Yeah.
So it was a tough life, but they were strong women. So, Mike, we mentioned that you have an aptitude for mechanics and car engines. When did you first start getting into that, and how did you get into it?
Good question, Kenny. It was, well,
Let me interrupt something.
okay.
He talked about the stone quarry and the equipment.
Mhm.
One of our first dates, he took me to the stone quarry and climbs on the crusher.
So he wasn't a real romantic fellow then.
Can you bleep that out?
Nope. Nope.
So anyway, Kenny, I guess mechanical things always intrigue me. I guess I can't even put a date on it, but it's just something that's how God wired me, I guess, lack of a better description.
Okay. So, Phyllis mentioned that her parents had 9 kids. How many kids did your parents have, Mike?
3.
3?
Yep, I had a brother George. He was 6 years older than me, and then a sister Grace, who was 3 years younger than me.
So you were right in the middle.
Yep, I'm that dreaded middle child.
Those are quickly disappearing in America these days.
Yeah.
And where did you fall in the pecking order, Phyllis?
I was third oldest.
Third oldest? So you had to do a lot to help out with the younger kids then too.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And Phyllis, you went to Immaculate Conception for grade school out in Oneida, right?
And well, they called it Vans Valley then,
Vans Valley,
right?
okay. Yeah, and there was the Vans Valley Dance Hall was there, and the store and the gas station were right next door. So what do you remember most about going to school at Immaculate Conception?
Well, I guess probably one of my best memories was my 4th through 8th grade teacher, Sister Mary Andrew. She was a gal who would, I guess, had a vision. She took us on field trips, which was huge then, to get on a bus and take a field trip. And we did that, I think, 4 times in the 4th through 8th grade. And she'd have days, we had a pine trees planted. We'd go into the pines and study outside the classroom and have baseball competitions with the school down the road, and just a lot. Those are probably my best memories of school.
Okay.
How many students were there at Immaculate Conception at the time, do you think?
I don't know don't remember the total, but my class had 11 in.
Okay.
And didn't they have two nuns there? One nun would teach like 1st through 3rd or 4th grade, and then the other nun would teach 5th through 8th grade?
Right. Did I say 4th? I meant 5th through 8th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and that's what I thought, that they had
Two.
2 teachers, and the kids
Yeah.
were all in that same group. And Mike, you went to St. Nicholas.
Yep, I went to St. Nick's. Yep.
What do you remember most about going to St. Nick?
Those were good years, our elementary school years. I don't know, we got along good. The nuns, we got a new nun each year, save I think the 6th and 7th grade. I had the same nun in those 2 grades, but good memories. I mean, good camaraderie with classmates. It was just a fun time.
Now, you went there when it was the new school.
No, that's a good question, Kenny. Actually, the 1st through 4th grades was in the old school that
Okay.
Joanne and I went to. In the 5th grade, they had torn the old school down, and so they put students everywhere they could think of. And so we did our 5th grade in the church basement. And then the school was completed, and then we started 6th grade in the new school.
Okay.
And so we did 6th, 7th, and 8th in the new school that is there today.
And what nuns stand out to you when you were there?
Remember Joanne's sister Ermelinda in our 1st grade? She was such a sweet.
Absolutely, she was
Yeah.
there for years
Yeah.
at St. Nick's.
Yeah. And then we had Sister Avila in 2nd grade. She was real nice too. In 3rd and 4th, we had the same nun into. And we had Sister Thomasella. And you didn't want to be monkeying around with Sister Thomasella. she ruled with a big stick, literally.
Now, I interviewed Jerry Wires yesterday, and he said he brought up the same nun and said the same thing. He's like, she believed in physical punishment.
Yep. Yes, she
She
did.
used a ruler a lot.
Yes, she did. Yep. She was a ruler in more than one way,
Yes,
wasn't
she
she?
was.
Yeah.
So that's how she's remembered by a lot of people. And then when you were there, Father Cools was the priest?
Well, yeah, he was up until it was a kind of a sad situation, really. Father Cools and I got along just great. He was the nicest guy. I can remember he would have movies in the church basement. Remember, Joanne?
Yep.
And if you look back at the projector, Father Cools smoked cigars. The smoke would be coming up around the projector, and we'd be watching the movie. But when the church blew up here in Kimberly, we lost Father Cools to Holy Name in Kimberly. They moved him over here because the priest was killed as a result of the explosion here, and they took our Father Cools away on us.
Okay, so we're resuming. If you hear a dog in the background, that's because they're dog sitting. And we have Yappy here with us today.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mike, you were telling them about Phyllis's grandmother.
Yep, so anyway, Phyllis's grandmother, I knew her. In fact, I even cut her spare lot with my lawnmower to make money. And but I never met Phyllis. It's, it's kind of ironic. So we didn't meet each other until when I was a sophomore in high school, she was a freshman. And I'm sitting, Kenny, I said, this day changed my life forever. I'm just by my locker, minding my own business, not bothering anybody, going after my books, and down the hallway walks this red-headed girl. And from that day forward, I was smitten. So that's how I met Phyllis.
See, he was romantic.
Mm-hmm.
He really was.
Yeah, prior to that time, if it didn't have 4 wheels and, make a lot of noise, then I didn't care much about it. But after that...
So Phyllis changed your life in a good way.
Yeah, uh-huh.
So, when you were at Freedom High School, what teachers stand out to you, Mike? What teachers do you remember?
Oh, golly. Miss Tratine, who was our English teacher. I think that the gal that sticks out the most to me is, her name was Phyllis Winger, was that right, Joanne?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She was our, social studies? I can't remember.
I think
She
so.
taught
Yeah.
literature.
But she had just started teaching, and the same with John Schwaller. John Schwaller. In fact, we were in John Schwaller's very first class that he ever taught out of college. And I think that was social studies.
He did teach social studies.
Yeah.
And
Bill
he-
Van Lannen, do you remember Bill Van Lannen?
Yes, I sure do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember him too. He was principal at the elementary school when I was there, and then when Mr. Patch retired, he became superintendent. So, and when you had John Schwaller, he was just a teacher then, not the principal, right?
Oh, that's correct. He was fresh out of college.
Was Bob Bachhuber
No,
principal for you?
Hank Patch had just come.
So
to
Mr.
be
Patch.
Yep,
Okay.
he was the principal. Yeah.
What do you remember about Mr. Patch?
Oh, he was a stern but a fair and a very decent man. I mean, we
Yes.
thought the world of Hank Patch. There was no question about it. He was a good guy. I remember one time Joanne's husband Vernon and I and Jerry Yankee and Jim Griner, we skipped school. And so it's all Vernon's fault, and you know, I would have never done it had it been for him. Anyway, we went to a movie in Appleton and whatever. It seemed like the longest day for, you know, isn't it time to go home yet? Well, anyway, the next morning we got a call to come to Mr. Patch's office one by one, and it wasn't pretty. Last time I skipped.
And Phyllis, what teachers do you remember from when you were there?
I guess I remember Mr. Schwaller teaching social studies also. And I think Miss Jatine was, I remember her in particular. And I think I feel the same about Mr. Patch. Sometimes he could tell what kids were going to do before they did it.
Mhm.
He'd meet you off, cut you off at the pass.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember him too. He was so nice. So, what did you do in your spare time when you were growing up? I know, Mike, you worked with engines and automotive. Anything else you did besides that?
Oh, Kenny, yeah. When we moved uptown, we didn't have much money. And so if I wanted some extra money, I better go out and earn it myself. I set pins for Nick Leash at Nick Leash's bowling alley.
Mhm.
I worked at Joe Geenan's store, a Super Value store for Mike Malik for several years. Then I worked for Dick Swears at the corner gas station, where John Garvey was, and then Dick Swears took it over. And then I worked at Freedom Locker plant for Mark DeCoster.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I also worked for, when I did the year that I graduated from high school, and then I was going to go to Tech. Fox Valley Tech was called Appleton Vocational School at that time. In the fall, Lee Valentine came over and he hired me to work for Joe Geenan again in with plumbing and electrical and whatever for that summer. So I worked that summer when I was going from high school to tech school. And then the tech school was a 2-year course. The second year I worked for Bud Garvey. Bud Garvey was in the boat business at that time. Where the Conrad boys have their service now.
Mhm.
Their car service thing, that was Bud Garvey's building. He had been in the heating business, and he had sold the heating business to his brothers, and he started selling boats. So I went to work for him.
Okay, and just for frame of reference, you mentioned Lee Valentine. Lee Valentine was the founder of Valentine Plumbing
Mm-hmm.
in Freedom for many, many years.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned Mark DeCoster. Now, that's a name that you don't hear much of in Freedom anymore. My mom still talks about Mark being the best butcher that she ever had in her life.
Okay. Yeah.
What are your memories of Mark DeCoster?
Mark, he was a unique individual. At least, I learned a lot from Mark. Strangely enough, I really liked the butcher trade. I was just completely enthralled with automobiles prior to that, but I really did like the butcher trade. But Mark was a difficult taskmaster, to be honest about it.
Okay, and we're back. So we were talking just a moment ago about the meat business, butchering, and Mark DeCoster.
Yep. So I worked for Mark DeCoster for several years while I was in high school or whatever, and I enjoyed the butcher business. He had this old guy that would come. He worked at the Piggly Wiggly store at Verhagen's Piggly Wiggly when it was in downtown Kaukauna. His name was Joe Levenhagen, and he taught me a lot. He was really a good butcher. So anyway, it was an interesting time.
And Phyllis, what do you remember you and your siblings doing in your spare time when you weren't working on the farm?
That's a good question, because we mainly worked at on a farm you all work, so that was mainly what took place. I didn't have any part-time jobs as a young person. Probably one of the big things that took place was my dad always had cattle at the Seymour Fair. He always had a prize herd, and I remember having showing cattle and things at the fair. That's probably the main thing I did outside of just being at home.
Well, didn't you go to the state fair once too?
Yes, I did.
With your cattle?
Yes.
What place did you take?
I did take a championship prize at the state.
Good for you.
So
So were you in 4-H or you just did that on your own?
I just did that on my own.
Okay. So, Mike, were you an obedient child or were you mischievous?
I was, like I told you, after my father died, and I don't know, part of the reason I guess I have this special bond yet to this day with my father is I was 12 years old when he passed away, so I didn't go through any of these teenage father-son head-to-head combat type of thing. You know, we never had a bad word between us. And so I was like a ship adrift for a while. And there was a time when I was growing up that I would say I wasn't disobedient, but certainly it wasn't my best time, I'll put it that way.
You
But
went through your little wild phase.
yeah, I guess you'd say that. Yeah.
And I already know the answer to this. Phyllis, you were a very obedient, angelic child.
Well, I wasn't disobedient, but I got a little bit. Of course, in my teenage years, I did some things I'm sure they wouldn't be pleased to hear about, but on the whole, I was obedient.
Well, what happened in Vans Valley stays in Vans Valley.
Good one, Ken.
We won't ask you that.
Oh.
So, Phyllis, did your family have any special traditions or holidays that you celebrated when you were growing up, like birthdays, Christmas, going to midnight mass, or Thanksgiving, anything like that?
Well, I do remember when my grandmother, Maggie, moved to Freedom from the farm. She had an annual family reunion on the Memorial Weekend, which was also the parade in Freedom. So we did spend the whole day with the parade and visiting with the family at Grandma's in Freedom.
And where did your grandma Maggie live in Freedom?
Well, she lived right on the main street. What is it?
On E?
On E,
Mhm.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about you, Mike? What do you remember of special traditions, things that you did on holidays or birthdays that stick out in your mind?
Kenny, we didn't. When my dad was alive, we did a lot of picnics in the summertime on a Sunday. We'd all go on a picnic. Joanne, you remember our picnics, I'm sure.
And a lot of movies.
Yeah.
We went to a lot of movies.
Yeah, but as far as, you know, a family reunion or something, the Randersons did not have family reunions that I can remember. My mother's side did more of that kind of a thing, but that would be maybe a once-a-year trip over to Michigan where all of her siblings were living at the time, so.
But we always had birthday parties, didn't we?
Did we? I don't even know.
Yeah, we had.
I guess, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
We didn't have birthday parties. And I always wanted to have a birthday party. And of course, my uncle Jim was just down the road a ways, and he was my godfather. So because I wanted a birthday so bad, I'd call him up.
Did you really?
I would call them up and they would come down. So we created our own birthday party
Oh,
Wow.
hey, that's
as
good.
a little kid.
That's good. You found a way to like fulfill that need.
And Christmas was always a big deal.
Oh, yes,
too.
Christmas was,
a very
yes.
big deal, even though we didn't have a lot of gifts and things, but Christmas was a big deal.
Yeah, very special. Christmas was, absolutely.
And did you go to midnight mass?
Sometimes, not always, but sometimes. I sure remember the choir at midnight mass. Freedom had a great choir there for a while. Wow.
So, what was, I'll ask this of Phyllis first, what was Vans Valley like when you were growing up as a child?
Well, as I remember, it was just a typical little jerk in the road like many probably in our part of the country, where you had a tavern, a gas station, a church, and of course you mentioned the dance hall was there years ago. I only remember, I think in one half of the tavern there was candy. I don't know what else was in there.
Yep.
But once in a while, I must have had some money and we'd go in there, but not very often, just once in a great while we would go in that side and buy some candy. But of course that's all that was there. It was really, you know, I guess not much to remember, but.
Yeah, and I talked to people who also went to Immaculate Conception, and they would talk about how they would sneak away at recess and go into the gas station there, and they would buy candy and sneak back and hope they didn't get caught by the nuns. So what was freedom like when you were growing up, Mike? What do you remember about freedom?
Freedom was I loved freedom. You know, because I had worked for so many different businesses, I got to know a lot of people, and I don't know, it was just a very friendly town. I loved it there. I mean, there's always been a special place in my heart for freedom, no matter where my travels have taken me. So nobody in particular, I guess, that sticks out, but and you know, when I worked at the Dick Swear's gas station, they sold liquor there. Now, I was only 16 years old, but yet I was selling liquor to people and whatever. And some of them didn't need any more that I sold it to. But we'll leave all of those stories lie. Yeah.
And that gas station is actually still there today. It's right on the corner of E and S. And I actually met Dick Swear's wife about 3 weeks ago. She stopped in at the Historical Society, and she was looking at pictures on the wall, and she's like, that's the car that I told Dick he had to buy before he dated me, because he never had a car, and I told him I wouldn't date a guy who didn't have a car.
Janice Weinberg, yeah.
Yep. So I met her. She came in with Tootie Garrett's.
Yep.
So her and Tootie came in together.
Yeah.
And Tootie looked at me and said, I don't know who you are, but I'm betting you're Casey's kid. I'm like, why? She's like, because you could be him. So you were around for two big things that happened in Freedom in the past, Mike. The first is the fire,
Yeah.
the big fire.
Yep.
And I know you told me that you had a paper route at the time.
Yes, I did.
Your mom sent you up to town actually to check on Joanne and her mom. So
Yep.
can you tell us a little bit about what you remember of the big fire at
Okay.
Nisha's Tavern?
I sure can. At that time I had Milwaukee Sentinel paper out, and our papers would be delivered overnight in front of the church. So we would get up, the Sentinel and the Journal were both delivered there. So Bob Conrad had the Journal route at that time. So we would get up before 5 o'clock Mass and assemble our papers, go to 5 o'clock Mass, and then we would sell papers after each Mass. And so I went to 5 o'clock Mass, came home and had some time to kill. I think the next Mass was at like 6:30, if my memory serves me right. And so all of a sudden we saw the red lights go by the house. It was a Seymour Fire Department went past. Well, then we looked up toward uptown and you could see the smoke. And my mother said, oh, Mike, it looks like it's Margie's place. You go over there and find out what's on fire, and you come right back here and tell me. And so I did. Went up there and I saw it was Nick Leish's Tavern. And I came back and told my mother. Well, then I went back up there. And I mean, they just couldn't stop the fire. It was out of control. And there just was no equipment, basically, to Seymour truck when it got there. I think it was froze up because it was real cold. It was below zero that morning. And they had trucks from other departments come. And I can remember your grandfather cutting the power off to the building, Pumpkin Vandenberg. He on a big ladder up by the telephone pole with 2 axes, one behind the wire and one in his hand, and knocking the wires to kill the power going into the building. And you know, it's very lucky. If there'd have been any wind or anything that day, I swear the whole town would have went down. And it was really a ferocious fire. They burned hard and hot, so to speak.
Yeah, and because of that, Fire Freedom ended up a year later having its own fire department.
Yep.
So that,
Absolutely. That was the impetus.
yep.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned having the Milwaukee Sentinel route.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who had that route in the 1970s?
No.
Me.
Did you really?
Yes. And you at the bank, you were one of my customers. You got the Milwaukee Sentinel every morning. Yep. So I had that route for 2 years. And then the other thing, and this is, it wasn't so much a town event, the big race.
Oh, the big race.
You know what race I'm talking about, right?
Yep. This was the race between Rusty Murphy and Mayor Gunnery.
Yep.
That's the race you're talking about? Yep.
It is.
So here I am. This is like I'm 10 years old. Okay, this is when we're still living on the farm. My father was still living then. Anyway, Rusty Murphy had this modified Mercury race car, and he raced it at primarily over at Oshkosh, but I think they would go to Slinger once in a while and race too. Anyway, at the tavern, at the Skunk Hill Tavern, which is right across the street from where Rusty lived, they got talking back and forth, and Mayor Gunring, his father had a brand new 52 Buick Roadmaster, and Mayor Gunring says, "That Roadmaster will beat that modified, no problem." And so one thing led to another. Everybody put their money down. There was bets, and so they closed off Highway S from C to Vine Road. Put sentries there and didn't let any cars come. And they had this race between Rusty Murphy's modified and John Gunring, Mayor driving 52 Buick Roadmaster. So here I am now, where we lived. When you left Skunk Hill, you went downhill and then it went flat and went past Norman Gearing's place over the creek and then up to Vine Road, and then they turned around and go back. Anyway, I'm standing out in front of our mailbox by our place. By now, Rusty's got that modified that's going as fast as it'll go already, because that thing had a lot of power. And he went whizzing by, and deafening noise, and behind him, I can't remember how far, came the Buick Roadmaster, and the exhaust sounded like a jet airplane almost. Shh, as it went past. Anyway, Rusty whooped up on him pretty good. They turned around at Vine Road and came back. By then, Rusty was way ahead. So, yeah. But Kenny, that I swear that's what whetted my appetite for these race cars. I don't know. I think that was it.
Well, and that makes sense, because Dad says he remembers you around 10 years old.
Yeah.
All of a sudden being around him and Rusty when they'd work on those cars.
Yeah.
And you happened to be under them and just wanting to know everything all about them.
Yeah.
That's what he remembers.
He was interviewed here last year, I believe, in Milwaukee, about, well, what was the beginning point of his career, and he told that story.
Yeah.
You have to know the characters involved to really appreciate
that really
story.
drives the story home. That it gives it additional flavor.
Yeah,
Let's put it that way.
absolutely.
So, Phyllis, when you were growing up, how big of a role did religion play in your family?
Well, I would say it played a big role because we always attended church every Sunday. I remember saying the rosary as a family. So I would say it was a very important part.
And what about you, Mike?
Yeah, religion was important. Yeah, we were regular church attenders, and Yeah.
So, how long, did you start dating in high school or was it after you were out, Mike?
Oh no, we started dating in high school.
So when you were a junior, you started dating her?
When I was a sophomore already.
Oh, a sophomore?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A sophomore, okay.
Yeah.
So, what do you remember about your first date, Phyllis?
I don't think I remember.
Ask Mike, right? He remembers everything.
I know when we didn't start dating till the end of my freshman year, and then it was prom time. And we went to the prom together
Yeah.
when I was a freshman.
Mhm.
I don't think we had too many more dates before that, really.
And what do you remember about your first date, Mike?
I should tell that he was president of the sophomore class. And of course, at that time, he was in the court.
Oh, sure.
And there were a number of girls in his class that, of course, were really hoping he would ask them. And then he went and asked this little freshman.
Yeah.
Created a little problem.
He made the right choice.
But our first date, I don't remember much about it either, Ken. I don't know. I think we went to a movie or something. We had to ride along with somebody else. I don't think I had, did I have a license? Did I have a car then? I don't think so.
You were so, I don't know, you always drove a car. You didn't have a license.
A lot of people did have licenses.
Yeah, yeah. But unfortunately, Ken, that's not going to be a highlight of this movie.
Well, that's okay. When Mom tells their first date story, it's our first meeting, it's all big and romantic, and Dad's like, that's how she remembers it, I'll just let it go. So, how soon after you graduated from school, Phyllis, did the two of you become engaged?
Well, that's a little bit of a story. See, he offered me a ring after we got out of high school, and I wasn't really ready for it. And so I didn't accept taking an engagement, so we never really had an engagement. And when it came time to get married, he says, well, you didn't want the ring when I offered it to you, so I'm not buying you one. I still don't have one. But I don't know. You had to go to school for a couple of years, and I moved to town, to Appleton, got a job in Appleton, and lived with my mother's sister, who was a single gal, and so we were married 2.5, 3 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you work when you moved to Appleton?
I worked for General Electric at first, and then I worked for Philmini Synchrocom.
Okay. And when did you get married?
June
Yeah.
29th, 1963.
Yeah.
63?
Yeah.
Did you get married at Immaculate Conception?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And who was the priest that officiated your marriage? Do you remember?
Sure. Father Traeger.
Okay. So he was there even back then.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
we
had
had
been there a while then already.
a
hadn't we?
while, I
Yeah.
guess, but not too long, because we had Father Reagan when I was in high school.
Okay.
So
And Mike, you told us that you went to vocational school after high school.
Yeah.
How long were you in vocational school?
It was a 2-year course. And so, as I said, always needed a supplement to the income in order to make ends meet. You wasn't making any money. Everybody else was all working by now. You know, when they got out of high school and they're working, and then I'm going back to school. So it was hard. You didn't have any money. Jim Greiner and I fixed cars on the side in Carl Greiner's cheese factory on the corner of Greiner Road and Inn to supplement our income to go to school. And so, yeah, but it was a 2-year course. When I graduated, Jim had gone on to do something else by then already, and I stayed on and fixed cars until I think just after we got married, maybe a month. And then I went to work for Schmidt Oil Company. in the fall of 1963. I worked there for 17 years.
And during that time, is that when you started your side business?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and can you tell us about your side business?
Okay, so always been interested in automobile racing. When I was in vocational school, I met a guy that asked if I could build him an engine for his race car. And so for the 2 years I was in tech school, I built an engine for this guy. His name was Jerry Smith. And he was quite successful. And then after we got married in '63, and we didn't have any money. So at the fall of '64, Jerry came to me and said, "How about if we build a car together? And you provide the engine and I'll provide the car and I'll drive it." And so that's how we got started. So I built engines. That was my main forte until probably 1969, 70. And then I became more interested in the chassis part of the car. I'd always helped build the chassis and stuff prior to that, but so then we raced the United States Auto Club, which is a professional racing. It was akin to NASCAR racing down south. It was a northern NASCAR basically, and the United States Auto Club ran all the state fairs and stuff like that, like the Illinois State Fair and Indiana State Fair, Wisconsin State Fair, to provide the races and stuff. So it was a pretty professional deal. And so anyway, we raced the 1969 season in the United States Auto Club. We had a good season, but financially it was terrible. And my employer at that time, Schmidt Oil Company, had bankrolled the operation of that particular car. And so we were in the red big time. And when I convinced them that it would be a good deal for them to come aboard to sponsor us, I never dreamt, quite frankly, that we were looking at through rose-colored glasses, as you might say. And so when the season was over, they had invested quite a bit of money, and I felt bad about it. They never asked me to make it up for them or anything, but I just didn't feel right about it. So what I did is the car that we had raced, I sold to a guy and took another car in trade, and then I bought a wrecked car, and I built a new car basically, and sold it, and just to settle the deal with Schmidt Oil. So that's what I did for the 1970-71 season. I didn't race at all. I just took care of getting things straight. But in retrospect, it was probably the best thing I ever did, because it's always best to do the right thing. It's one of those lessons you learn. And as hard as it was to do it that way, we built our house in 1971, and we no more got the house built. This is kind of a funny story. And the garage was sitting empty out there, and I'd go out and walk around in the garage, and Phyllis could tell what I wanted. Finally she said, "Just go ahead." So I had a few parts left over from all of the bartering I had done to get this car built for Schmidt Oil Company, and I went to Valley Auto Parts. The guy that ran that was a real good friend of mine. He gave me a Chevelle, and so I built a new race car, and I sold it to a guy from Bear Creek. And
he built it in the garage with no heat that winter.
Yeah.
And we have a fireplace downstairs, so he'd get so cold he'd come in and he'd warm up by the fireplace and go, "Goodness."
Yeah. So anyway, the guy that bought the car from me was a cabbage farmer from over near Bear Creek. His name was Roger Paul, and he was a a real good local driver. He had had success up at the Shawano Speedway. That's where he had raced primarily. And when he bought the car from me, he had his own crew. And so basically when the car left here, I thought I was done with it. So he took it home and his crew got it running, and they had a lot of engine trouble. They supplied their own engines. And so finally the crew got disenchanted and left Roger sitting on the high and dry. And we had been to Milwaukee to watch the Miller High Life 200 stock car race. This is in July, first part of July every year at that time. And we got home that afternoon and Roger Paul was on the phone. Mike, would you take over this car for me? And so I did. And then it took me about a week or two to get the car up to snuff, I think it was, and boy, we had so much success that season, it wasn't funny. And so that kind of springboarded us, you know. We built, what I would do is build one car and field it ourselves with a driver, and then we would build a car or two for other people. And finally we built it to the point where by the end of the 1976 season we had built a name for ourselves. In between 1974 and 1976 the cars that I had fielded myself had won like 70 some feature events, and you know, that's pretty successful. And so it would wear me out. Literally I'd lose about 20 pounds in the course of a season because I was holding down a full-time job. We were racing 4 and 5 times a week, plus maintaining the car in between races, you know, so you're working constantly. And so at the end of, as the 76 season wore on, Phyllis and I just decided, you know, I was going away from home too much to all these tracks every night and what have you, and you know, it just wore out. It wasn't a good situation, so we decided we would just build cars for other people as a sideline, and so we thought it'd be a nice, simple business. We'll just build these cars, you know, and everything will be real good. So about the time that people heard that I was going to just build cars for other people and they wouldn't have to race against us, so to speak, we got a lot of people wanted to buy cars. And so it didn't take long for our little side business to get very complicated. So it took me from 1976, the fall of 76, until the first of the year in January of 1980 to get to thing where I felt comfortable to jump off the diving board and rely totally on the racing business for our livelihood. You know, I had mortgage to pay and kids to feed. And I had a good job at Schmidt Oil. I mean, I was their, what they call their fleet manager. I'd worked myself up to that position. And so I had been with them for 17 years. And I went to Ray Schmidt, one of the 3 brothers that had owned the company, and I said, Ray, I'd really like to try this. He said, Mike, you go right ahead. If you ever need a job, just let me know. And so it was with his blessing that away I went. And so Randercar was born at that time as a full-time thing. And we built that Randercar. You know, we built lots of race cars, and we had race cars from sea to shining sea, and we had some cars in Canada. So you know, the cars won lots of major races over the years and stuff. But by 1992, I was totally wore out, and I just needed to do something different. And so I sold the business to my nephew, my brother George's son Jim, and I went to work for Oshkosh Truck Corporation at that time. So that's another part of my life that, you know, I worked for Oshkosh for 13 years, and I don't know if you want to talk about that now or not, but
We can, if you wanna talk about it now. You went back to Schmidt Oil again after that, didn't you?
no.
Oh, I thought you did.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, but he only worked at Oshkosh Truck a few years, 3 or
Yeah.
4 years, and he starts designing parts in his spare time.
Yeah, so this is,
By this time, I had enough business. And he starts designing, calling me up.
yeah. So anyway, like Phyllis said, about 3 or 4 years at Oshkosh Truck and the old racing inventive juices started to flow again.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's a lot easier to see that forest from the outside in than it is from the inside out too. And there was a lot of things that I'd always wanted to build when I had the business, but never really got time to. And so anyway, we started designing some suspension components and whatever. And we got all done with our stuff. Well, here I'm working at Oshkosh Truck Corporation. I have no means of marketing this stuff. And so, okay, now we got this done. What are we going to do with it? And so, as luck would have it, during the end of my tenure at Randerson Racing, catalog houses had just come to be, so to speak, in the racing business. And I had done business with several of the catalog houses. They were small at that time, but in those 3, 4, 5 years that I'm talking about, they had grown exponentially, and so had the market grown exponentially. And so I knew the guys that owned these outfits, and I'd call them, hey, I got this whatever, and well, can we take a look at one? Yeah, absolutely. So I send them one. Do you care if we put it on a car and test it? Well, by all means, goes, you know. So they do that, put it on a car of a customer that they typically did testing with, and call me back, hey, that thing works really good. So we made a deal, basically, you know, to sell these various catalog houses our suspension components. And we were really the best kept secret in town, because most of those guys marketed the stuff under their own brand. And so we were flying under the radar. But anyway, so I'm working at Oshkosh Truck, and you know, my jobs are getting better and better right along. Finally, I'm the regional sales manager, the central region sales manager for airport and municipal products. And that's the aircraft rescue firefighting trucks and the heavy-duty snow equipment. We sold primarily to airports, but we did sell to municipalities too, with snow trucks and stuff like that. And it was really a good job. But so here we're trying to, you know, I'm running this sales territory, and what I do is I take my drawing board along on the airplane, and I'm not a drinker or anything, so you're sitting in the hotel at night, and who knows where, you're in Denver tonight and you're in who knows where tomorrow night, but it gives me time to draw parts up. So I get a drawing package done. I'd hand the drawing package over to Phyllis. She would go out to our different vendors and you know, machine shop or laser cutting shops or metal forming shops or plating shops, and get prices on all this stuff. And then we put together, get all the parts rounded up. I'd come home on the weekend, we'd spend the whole weekend putting component parts together to ship out to the catalog houses. So that company actually grew to be way more profitable than Randerson ever was. I mean, and the name of that company is still operating today is Right Foot Performance Products. And,
As he traveled around the country, he would run into old customers of ours. And of course, he'd tell them about his new parts. So they'd say, send me one. So he'd call me up. One night he called me up to ask me, I had to put this sway bar or something together. He says, well, it only goes together one way. I said, no, it doesn't. I put this together 3 different ways.
yeah, it's a good thing, yeah.
And you traveled a lot, didn't you, with Oshkosh?
Oh, I did, Joanna. I was probably
Yeah,
traveling
so you-
60-70% of
Yeah.
the time. Yeah, yeah. And we were putting everything together in our third stall out here. And we would often joke to ourselves, if these guys could see where these parts are coming from, what would they say, you know?
So did you leave Oshkosh Truck then?
Oh,
You stayed with them the whole time that business was up?
yeah, I stayed with Oshkosh until I retired from them at 63 years old or whatever.
Okay.
Worked for them for 13 years. And I gotta stop here and say, what a ride that was. I mean, I never had a college education, but they provided me one, basically, is what it boils down to. And they let me move around on the inside. I had got to do just a bunch of different things. I got to work on the defense side and the commercial side. I got to work I was in the training department for a while, you know, and it was really quite an experience to work for them people. Just a super company.
I think one thing I will always remember about you, Mike, is when you were retiring from the board at the Historical Society, and you were talking about Phyllis, and you told me that you could not have asked for a more supportive, a more helpful, or a better wife than anyone like Phyllis, that she was there for you, side by side, every step of the way, and how blessed you were to have her with you.
Yeah, and Ken, you know, how come it takes us so long to realize how lucky we are sometimes? I mean, she's a jewel, that's
As
for
you
sure.
heard, the hours he worked on his jobs and his part-time jobs, and he never worked one job. It was always 2 or 3 things at least. And so, they used to call you a girl Friday who did everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Phyllis,
It was good.
yeah, she ran the office at Rander Car, and she had, I would be real busy selling this stuff, and then when time to collect for it, I'd say, well, Phyllis, you call, we're behind on her bill.
That was the worst part of the job, right?
Yeah.
Well, I learned that a soft, what does the Bible say, a soft answer turns away wrath, or, you know, and to just be kind, because, you know, a lot of these guys were spending what they probably should not have been spending, you know, so I got along well with them for what I had to do.
Oh, yeah, people, they won't get out of their mouth, ask, how are you doing? They don't hardly get it out of their mouth, well, how's Phyllis? Yeah.
So,
Well, behind every good man.
Oh, yeah, and it's certainly no exception here, I'll tell you that.
And you held, or maybe still hold, several patents through that business, don't you?
Kenny, people ask me that all the time, and I do not hold any patents whatsoever.
Oh, I thought you did.
We came out with a spindle nut locking arrangement way back in I think it was, we were just looking at the stuff from the patent attorney on that the other day. It was in the 80s, I think. And in those days, you had to hire somebody to search the archives in Washington, D.C. to see if your thing was patentable or not. They didn't have electronics like we got these days. So you literally, somebody had to go into the archives, go and searching through all these documents to see if if you were infringing on somebody else's. So anyway, this thing, we had spent a bunch of money on this particular thing, and finally I just said, the heck with it. And so we did not patent that. And ironically, that part is still the industry standard to this very day. And by now, I am sure, and I don't want to overstate this, but I am sure that there's probably close to 500,000 of them out in the world as we speak. I mean, over the years, you know what I mean?
Sure.
I mean, it's the industry standard. So on the strength of that, what we concentrated on doing, you know, when you get a patent, you got to be your own patent cop. And so you can spend your time chasing after a guy for infringing on your patent, but the burden of proof is on you. And so what we did is we just concentrated on getting to market. And when you do have larger market numbers, it's harder for people to sell the product for what you can sell it for, and it discourages them from jumping on your patent, so to speak, so. But anyway, that's a long answer to your question, Ken.
Okay. And then you had talked about raising kids. How many kids did you have?
We had 4 children. We had 3 girls and a boy. Daughter born in 1964, some 11 months after we got married, and then we had a son born in 1966, and then the girl that was just here picking up her dog, she was born in 77, and then we had our final girl in 1983. So, yeah,
So
took
quite
us
an age
19
difference
years.
between some of them.
19 years to have our children.
And how many grandchildren?
Well, we got 8 grandchildren. Well, now we got 11.
11 grandchildren?
Yeah, we had 8 for a long time, but now we have 3 step-grandchildren, so we have
Okay.
11.
And any great-grandchildren?
No.
Nope, not yet.
Not
Not
yet,
yet.
no.
Not yet. So, we know what Mike's hobbies are. What are some of your hobbies, Phyllis?
I guess my hobbies were keeping up to him. I mean, I like crafts and different things over the years, and certainly gardening, different things, but to say I had one thing in particular, I guess.
Well, you were a great seamstress way back in
I
the
did
day.
those things, but I guess as we got so involved in these businesses that I didn't have a lot of time for those things between that and the children.
Mhm.
I can see you like flowers.
So,
Mm,
Are
yeah,
the flowers around here?
but
yeah, you
yeah, I
love
always,
flowers.
I
yeah.
always did like to do flower beds and things.
If it was up to me, there wouldn't be a tree in the yard, Ken. But,
No,
you know, that's all Phyllis.
I'm with Phyllis on this one, Mike. I'm with Phyllis.
I hear you.
So, Phyllis, thinking back to the 40s, 50s, and early 60s, who were some of your favorite singers back then?
Oh my gosh. I guess I didn't. Well, I had one cowboy,
Okay,
which is not well known, Rex Allen, but he was a very good singer.
okay.
Remember Rex Allen? You ever hear of him?
I never heard of them.
So, but he was,
I remember him.
he was the best looking cowboy and he could
Yeah.
sing. But he wasn't well known. But I did, my dad used to take us to the movies in Deep here. Of course, he liked the cowboy movies, so we saw a lot of cowboy movies. But this night, Rex Allen was actually going to be at the theater, and to this day I have an 8x10 autograph by him. So, but as far as a particular singer, no, I don't remember.
And what TV shows did you like to watch back then, Phyllis?
Oh gosh. You remember how old I am now? Trying to think, I suppose, gosh, we didn't have a TV till I was 12. Well, of course, there was the Walt Disney, what was it, with Skip and
Oh, that was a Mickey Mouse Club.
Mickey
Spin and-
Mouse.
Spin
Yeah.
Spin and
Marty.
Marty,
Spin
yeah.
and Marty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that was a big deal, and of course the rock and roll with
Dick Clark.
Dick
Clark.
American
Yes.
Bandstand.
American Bandstand.
yeah, that was huge.
Yeah.
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 Then of course Saturday night I think there was a country western, the Grand Ole Opry.
Okay. And any, you said you saw a lot of westerns growing up. Any that sticks out in your mind, or any other movies that you remember?
No, I can't say that there's anything in particular, no.
Okay. And those same questions to you, Mike. First of all, any singers you remember?
Oh man, Connie Francis was my heartthrob. You know, if she'd asked me to marry her, I don't know, it would have been a close call. But
I met Connie Francis.
did you really?
Met her when I lived in California. She was Mom's, you and Mom are the same age. She was Mom's favorite singer growing up. And I scored big brownie points when I brought home an autographed picture of Connie Francis to Judy. And when Mom was a teenager, instead of J-U-D-Y, she spelled it J-U-D-I with a little heart over the I.
Okay.
That's how Connie Francis signed it, so I'm expecting more in the will.
But I don't know, Elvis Presley, you know, Pat Boone.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a,
What was that?
I don't
Oh, I
know.
thought he meant in my younger days.
Oh,
in
and
high school.
anybody.
yeah.
So,
And What about TV shows that you liked, Mike?
Oh man, Gunsmoke, couldn't miss that on Saturday night. Old Marshall Dillon, you know, and I don't know, Badge 714, you ever hear of that one?
I never did.
Sergeant Joe Friday, remember that, Joe?
Oh, Dragnet?
Yeah.
What did he always say? Joe Friday?
Just the facts, just the facts.
Yeah.
That's it.
Give me the facts, just
Friday,
the facts.
Joe Friday.
Yeah, yeah.
And what about movies?
You know, there's one movie that sticks out that I just absolutely loved. I'm a Jimmy Stewart fan. He's probably my favorite actor. And he did this movie called Rear Window, where he had a broken leg and he's sitting there with nothing to do, so you know. Yeah.
He was a photographer and Grace Kelly was in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So,
And the bad guy was Raymond Burr.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Lived across the way.
Yep, I've seen that movie many times. Now this is the last question. It's also the hardest question. I'll ask Phyllis first.
Oh, you should have sent that over ahead of time.
So what would people most be surprised to learn about you, Phyllis?
Oh my gosh. You should ask Mike that
I
question.
don't know,
Well, Mike is gonna get asked that question.
But I mean about me, I don't know what would.
All right, we could switch it up. So Mike, what would people be most surprised to learn about Phyllis?
you know.
Ask me.
Wow.
I think what would surprise me the most about Phyllis was that you were as involved in Rent-A-Car as you were, and all the parts and all of that. I just never would have pictured you, you know, that interested in racing, just from knowing you, you know, from the past. So that would surprise, that, you know, for me, that would be a surprise. I mean, I've known it for a long
Probably, yeah.
time, but
Well, probably a lot of people didn't know the part, what part I played in his life, I guess you'd have to
how
say.
involved you were in the
Yeah,
business.
she was the behind the scenes.
That
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
business when he was at Oshkosh Truck, I mean, I would do all the purchasing and all the ordering and pick all the stuff up. I mean, people had no clue I did any of those things,
Yeah.
you know, I guess.
Okay.
Did all the bookkeeping, taxes.
So we'll ask this next question of Joanne then. So Joanne, what would people most be surprised to learn about Mike?
I don't know, he's just such a great guy. I don't think anything would surprise me, at least. He just got a heart like his dad had, just heart as big as his body, and just kind person.
Yeah, you're one of those people, Mike, where everyone has a kind word to say about you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Ken.
Anything else either one of you would like to add?
I guess not. I don't know. What? How about you?
I guess not.
No.
Well, thank you for meeting with us today.
Oh, Ken.
And it's been an honor to be here. And Joanne, thank you for joining.
Okay.